pawn structure that we're going to talk about today is called the wedge in the book. He coined a few pawn structure terminologies that may or may not be useful to you, but they at least help us to talk about it for today. So when he's talking about the wedge, he's talking about a pawn structure that can arise in various ways, but often arises in the French defense. So this is our French defense. And the wedge happens when white is provoked to play the move e5, and then supports their e5 pawn. And in the book, Soltis talks a lot about how the wedge formation gives white a spatial superiority and often a much better endgame if they can just keep trading pieces and maintain control of some key outpost squares. So this lesson, while it's about the wedge pawn structure, it's also about outpost squares. So let's see this first game and talk about some of the comments that they made and some of my own comments here. So after e5, we're in the game Tarrasch versus Teichmann. And this game happened in what year? Let me see, 1912. So probably one of the first games in this pawn structure. Well, not in this pawn structure, but in this specific position. I've even played this position with white a few times. I personally don't care for it, but I do see why both sides might aim for this position. With white, the nice thing is that you eliminate the bishop that is worse for black, because you eliminate your bishop that's worse because your pawns are on the same color as that bishop for the bishop that was better from black, the dark square bishop. So you make a potentially favorable exchange, and on top of that, you are able to establish a really strong pawn barrier here and keep a space advantage late into the game. But for black, the nice thing about this position is that in this particular variation, their queen being developed could be useful as well, but this is really not the main thing black's going for here. The main thing that black cares about in this position is that they can rapidly attack the central pawns. So you might be wondering, if both sides are happy here, how is that possible? Because chess is sort of a zero-sum game, right? Whatever is good for you is bad for me. Whatever's good for me is bad for you. That's always true. The only exception is when it ends in a draw, and that typically will end the game on the spot. So, and even then, sometimes a draw is better for one side. So, I think that depending on how you get this structure, it can be better for one side or the other. So it's important to know the themes for how to play this position, even if we don't know exactly what the evaluation should be. It doesn't really matter. We should just know how to play this, because this can happen in a variety of ways. You don't even have to be playing the French defense with either side to see this pawn structure in your games, or one that's very similar to it. So Tarrasch played queen d2, and Teichmann castled, and this is all pretty normal stuff. White played f4, supporting the e5 pawn. And here's a moment for you guys. What do you think black should do to try to finish their development? Feel free to just put it in the chat. And if you're watching the recording, you could pause here and think about what black should do. Yeah, Shai has it. They should just play c5. And the idea behind c5 is not just to potentially destroy this pawn wedge in the center, but to develop the knight behind it with knight c6. Yeah, and Phoenix has it as well. So c5 is a perfectly normal good move. And I think it's really the only move to consider here. Maybe I don't know all the ideas for black. There might be some kind of exotic options here, but I think c5 is so textbook, so good. Like, you probably can't play this position without c5. Whenever you see this kind of pawn structure, you really need to go for c5. For instance, if you play knight c6 in this position, white is going to just develop their pieces in normal ways. Like, they'll play probably knight f3, maybe a3, just to stop you from putting a knight or a queen on b4 before they play bishop d3. And then they could castle probably either way. I'm not sure which one I would choose. I'd have to think about it a lot. But The issue for black is that very quickly, even though white has several obvious moves to play in rapid succession, basically no matter what black does, they're having a very hard time to activate not just this bishop, which is problematic in this pawn structure overall because it's on light squares for black, but also to get their rooks into the game because the knight on c6 is blocking the c pawn, and the best file to open is the c file. They want to go like this with the rooks, and if they can't get rid of the c pawn before playing knight c6, they can't bring the rook to the c file. So that's kind of the rationale behind c5 as opposed to knight c6, which might be more intuitive for starting players. So here comes c5, normal good move. I don't think I need to make you guys guess to play knight f3. That's a very obvious move. Knight c6 is typical, normal, good. And here, white went ahead and played g3, which I think is a pretty accurate choice in this particular position. The reason being that, well, I guess you guys will see, it has to do with how we should place this light square bishop. We want to put it on g2. And if we had put it on d3, it would obstruct our plan, which is really like the critical position we should be talking about. So maybe here we should look for what black should do. So g3, obviously while he wants to play like bishop g2, maybe castle. How should black deal with this? And this is sort of a conceptual question because it's sort of like the question where I'm asking, like, should black play c5? What's the way that black is going to generate counterplay in a position like this? And you might want to think of like the next couple of moves, or like your first move with an idea of what would happen next. Right now, white has a very nice central formation. It's kind of hard to shake it right now. But black could at least get rid of the d-pawn like this at some point. It doesn't have to be right now. I think it's sometimes beneficial to maintain that tension because when you trade these pawns, it also helps white to clarify where they should place their pieces. So you might want to wait to take until they don't have a convenient way to recover the pawn. So we should be looking at other ways to activate the pieces for black. The move that comes to my mind is f6. This is one of the thematic moves that happens in this pawn structure. Basically, after the move f6, we are attacking this pawn and this pawn. And Shai, I saw your comment if e takes f3, but I think your first comment might not have gone through. So maybe you're having a connection issue. I'm sorry about that. So f6 is with the idea of dismantling the center. And you might think that this is all for nothing because if you... Okay, I got your f5 move. So if you're dismantling the center with c takes d4 and f takes e5, in the end, there's always going to be a white piece standing on these squares. So you might think this is all kind of like useless and not good. But if you can make white put a pawn on e5 forever, that means that you can build up your attack against that pawn. So you might bring your queen to a square where it attacks e5, bring both knights to attack e5 like they're already doing here. So conceptually, it's not terrible to isolate a pawn on e5. It can even be winning for black in some situations. The other situation that you can get here is that in the end there's a white piece on d4 or e5, but it's like a knight or a queen or something. But if you can drive it away, then you as black can play e5 or d4. So even though you're not destroying the center all in one shot in the way that you might want, like you can't make white take on f6, you can't make white take on c5. Those moves are probably not good in most situations. But you still have things to play for even if white doesn't cooperate. So if you play a move like f6, you might see pawn takes f6 here. Reason being that if you play like bishop g2, I'm just going to add a line here. I haven't analyzed this. But here, if you take and then take here, you're winning material. Because if you take back, there's knight takes e5, and if you throw this in between move, it doesn't help. In fact, this just makes it worse. Probably here white should just castle, because allowing knight takes, this looks very dangerous. Like, we can only castle queenside now, and there's knight c4 potentially. So I think f6 is a really nice idea here. It stops the obvious bishop g2 move. It forces them to play a move like e takes f6. At which point we might see like knight takes, castling, destroy the center some more, and then here is a good moment to pause. So now that, and this is just to demonstrate black's counter ideas against this wedge pawn structure. So now that black has clarified the center so much, what should they play here? They finally cleared both d4 and e5. Yeah, I think Shai was guessing f6 earlier. I was mulling it over while I was talking because you said f3 and then f5. So a little convolution and interpolation later, I think it was f6. An instance of what not to play. Knight takes d4 doesn't make sense. Because after queen takes d4... Oh, you were thinking f5? Yeah, f5 is also potentially good. We can go back and take a look at that in a second if you want. So after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, white has a full blockade on the center. Black is not able to play like e5, they can't play d4. If they can't play knight e4 for counterplay. Not that knight e4 would give them good counterplay in this position anyway, because they can't support it with f5. F-pawns are gone. I think this would be really bad for black to play knight takes d4. Mistake. So in that light, and if you're watching the recording, you should pause here because I'm about to tell you something. Yeah, Mount Fiant has it. It's e5. And this activates all black's pieces. Yeah, Shai got it too. You guys are on the same wave, so I'm kind of looking forward to your upcoming fan face-off, where you guys are going to go head-to-head in Blitz and Rapid. It should be an interesting match, especially if you guys have some meme banter in the midst. And for that reason, I also need to get my Discord audio recording working, so I'm going to test that out before I stream you guys. Can't miss. Everyone must watch the Mount Fiant versus Shai face-off, which is coming up in like 2 weeks, I think. Okay, so this is it. This is an interesting way to get counterplay. You destroy the center, and then you break in the center yourself. Some people really, really like to play against the fixed pawn structures, like this one, because the center is kind of a sitting target, and if your opponent doesn't know the strategic ideas well enough, you can often just go ahead and execute your plan without thinking too hard. You know, you destroy that center, you know how, you play c5, you play f6, you trade all that stuff, and then you break wherever it's possible. But I think white is often better in the wedge pawn structure. So while things are pretty easy for black to play strategically, white objectively has more space and has good things to play for, as we'll see in this game, which is Tarash versus Teichmann still. So in the game they played a6. f6 was better, and probably it was equal after f6. But after a6, they went astray, and white got this extra move to throw in bishop g2. And they added b5 as well, which you could consider a loss of time again. And here's a conceptual question. Should white castle queenside or kingside? What do you guys think? You know, it's castling time. We've developed all the other pieces. Oh yeah, if the memes don't let you play f6, let's go back and take a look at that. Like, for instance, if you're allowed to play f5 only. Yeah, Shai, you have it right. We'll come back to that. I forgot that I was going to address this as well. In this position as well, I think probably it's a good idea to take en passant in this situation, because you have the e5 break under control. But maybe queen takes gives good counterplay. Maybe like this. White definitely can't be worse after f5 either. But yeah, let's come back to the original question. So castling short makes a lot more sense, because if you castle queenside, I would say this is a blunder, in fact. What do you guys think black should play after queenside castling? Yeah, it is the same as the f6 line if they take. That's true. I was just thinking about what other distinct ideas we might have there. Probably after f5, white should just ignore it. You know, like just play with more space and play for the g4 break. I think I have an example like that here, which is kind of why I wanted to go past it. Okay, so should I say b4? Yeah, b4 should be fine. Nothing wrong with being backwards. I think probably they have to play like knight e2. But now you need to be a little bit precise, maybe. What do you think black should play in this position? The move that I was kind of getting at here was c4, so you got it right. I think c4 should come first, actually. I'm not sure it really matters, though. We could check that out. Yeah, c4, bang. I think that in this position, white is basically crushed. Even if they had several more moves, like if they had a pawn on like h5 right now, I don't think that white is doing okay. The queenside attack is pretty rapid. So the idea, there's various ideas here, but a simple just rush on the king is what's going to happen. They'll just activate the pieces, come get the king. I think white should possibly play c3, and this is part of why I think it might be important to play c4 before b4. So let's say you play the move c3 here. This is still okay. I think this is probably the righteous choice. If you play a3, it locks the position, but black can sacrifice a piece on a3 anytime. Or c3 or b2, it depends. If you trade here, I think this also gives black good play. Trying to play knight d3 here, and even if knight d3 doesn't happen, I think black is doing fine. If you ever play a3, b3 will become fatally weak. Yeah, so black is probably winning more clearly in this line, but the idea of sacrificing on a3 is quite enticing as well. You just need to like calculate a kind of long line here to see if it works, which I'm not willing to do right now. So I thought maybe c4 first, because that way you could get in like b4 and then c3 rapidly, depending on what they play. But I think probably here you don't have anything better than playing b4, so I guess they're kind of similar or identical. Okay, so this is an interesting exercise. If they castle long, you should play like c4 and b4, that kind of thing. So castling short makes a lot more sense. You don't want to run into an attack like that. Now here we're kind of cruising into the kind of position where white is doing quite well, because they've accurately avoided these breaks with a little help from black. They haven't stepped into a queenside attack, and their development's complete. So if black does nothing here, white is going to eventually try to play something like f5 and then f6 with the transparent idea of attacking their king. But they can also try to force the kind of endgame that black permitted in this situation. See, earlier I said that d takes c5 is not necessarily something you want to do, which I don't mean as a blanket statement. I mean that in most positions you don't want to play c5 until the critical moment. So here I would say that we're approaching a critical moment where white would consider playing d takes c5 if their next move can be knight d4. In the game, they took on d4, which permitted knight takes d4 anyway. And so we kind of have to discuss this position. The pawn structure has been clarified a lot by c takes d4. Currently we have 3 versus 2 on the queen side, but I wouldn't consider this like a pure 3 versus 2 because we still have these the d pawn here. So white cannot play a simple queenside majority strategy. If you're not sure about the queenside majority, let me know. I have plenty of material to teach about how to play with a majority. I just haven't prioritized it yet. So if that's a priority for you guys, just let me know in the comments, and I'd be willing to bump that up in my list of things to teach. Anyway, in this situation, white cannot just like push these queenside pawns because of the d pawn being in the way. In fact, the d pawn, while it's good at restraining white's pieces, it also blocks in their light square bishop. And the closure of the d-file means that white is the only one who can really use the d-file at all. They can use everything from 1 to 4, or even 5 if they want to sacrifice something. So I would say that favors white's activity in the center. And on the king side, we have 4 versus 4, but white has more space there. Black can break with f6, but that would weaken e6, as you might see in some of the games I picked. I don't remember right now. So white's strategy in positions like this is pretty simple. They want to maintain a piece on the outpost square, going all the way to the endgame. They're just going to try to keep something there on d4 that's not a pawn. A knight, a queen, a rook, a king. Not the bishop, because we don't have a bishop, but if you had one, that would be a good idea too. As long as it's not a pawn. Because when you put a pawn on d4, that becomes a tactical target for the remaining knight. Even if these knights were traded off, they might play like knight b8 to c6 to attack a pawn on d4. And in addition, if there's a pawn on d4, you can't use that square for your pieces anymore. And why do we want to use d4? If we could keep a piece on d4, it allows us to control all sides of the board. Even if it's a knight who doesn't have long-range vision, they attack the queen side directly. They blockade the center, and they can jump to the king side on either f5 or e6. So even if it's not a long-range piece, d4 is a really great square, especially for the knight, because if you put it somewhere else, it's going to be less powerful. So for that reason, black is trading off the knight, keeping a queen there, but we said queen's good there too. They played queen c5, so they're just trying to get rid of everything here. And here, I thought that the best move should be like knight e2 at a first glance, but I realized that a tactical mistake here. At least I think so. I think that the issue with playing knight e2 directly is that the c-pawn's hanging, and we can't try to trap the queen or go for the c-file because the knight is hanging as well. So for that reason, the best move is queen takes c5. And now we want to put a knight on d4 again, so we play knight e2. At this point, I would say white is better. And playing this position is sort of a thing you can do by rote. It's a textbook method for winning this position, but it also requires a lot of precision. So I'll show an example first, and then we can see some more. So first we put the knight on the outpost square. I think that black could have tried to stall white's activity with a move like knight to a4 to try to provoke some weaknesses, but even this doesn't seem impressive to me. Like, we play this. I guess they should go back to c5. No, maybe b6, so they can use the open file. And then, even in this position, I don't really see b3 as a very weakening move. But maybe this is a better chance for black. Anyway, they finished their development, which is natural and good. I think they chose d7 to try to stop white from ever playing a4. but I don't think white really cares to play a4. So knight d4 happened. And then rook c8. Now let's see what happens if black plays f6. What do you guys think white should play here? And try not to give just one move. I think you have to see at least a couple moves here, because it's forced. Black wants to play pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5, rook takes f1, probably. And after rook takes f1, rook f8, just trade everything, and then leave a weak pawn on e5 that they could attack with the knight long term. And this should give them enough play to equalize, probably. So they're definitely playing for equality here. And it depends on the move f takes e5, creating a weakness in the center. The next thing to consider is if we play pawn takes f6, which is forcing, should they take with the rook or no? What do you guys think? G takes f6 might also be intuitive. You could see it as capturing towards the center and trying to build your center presence. But rook takes is also like a natural move. So is there any issue with that, or is it like perfectly good? Looks like it activates the rook. What could go wrong? Okay, so Shai would take with rook. Any dissenters? Does anyone quarrel with him? Shai, when you say G takes F is less intimidating with no queens on the board, do you mean like white shouldn't worry about that structure, or black? I could see your argument going either way, because if they play G takes, they could be trying to play rook G8 or to break with E5, and if queens are on, maybe your king could get under attack. But also for black, probably if the queens are on, then G takes F6 might be like weakening of their king. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think it makes more sense to argue that black should be worried about playing G takes F6 if queens were on. An attack would be possible. Although I should say that often black is swinging for the fences in this kind of structure. They just want to break and play very actively so that white can never organize an attack on their king, because the center's fluid. Could make it difficult to actually control the attack. Now here, if we take with the rook, I don't think there's a lot going on here for black. Because after a move like maybe this rook to e1, you can't play knight e4. I'm attacking that with two pieces. You can't play e5. I'm attacking that also with two pieces. And the knight on d4 is still very good. So I don't know if this is helping strategically for black. Like, I think white could play statically here. And they also don't have to play statically. There's another option here that's more tactical in nature. But it shows up most clearly in this line. So I think G takes f6 is really the most active choice for black here. They're saying, I want to play e5 really badly. But I think that white has a specific way of shutting down this attempt at counterplay by saying, be my guest. Go ahead and play e5. Because on this move only, if they play e5, there's a problem. The rook's hanging. I mean, the pawn's also hanging, but like everything kind of goes on the light scores now. Even if they get the knight on d4, it's not adequate compensation, and I don't think they'll even get it. because if they take the knight, the bishop on a8 will escape. So it might look like this. If you take the knight, I save the bishop, and then I have a really great bishop. And if you take the bishop, I'll play a knight move. I don't know which one. Maybe knight e2. Yeah, something like that. I don't know. Just put my knight somewhere. I don't really care. So I'm just happy to be up in exchange. I'll think about where to put my knight later. So this move f5 is really good. This is the point I wanted to emphasize here. That if they play f6, it doesn't work because of this forcing move, pawn takes f6, and rook takes makes no sense. I should also emphasize that you can still play f5 here because the knight guards f5. I guess even if the knight didn't guard f5, if they took, we could take with the rook, and then we still have bishop d5 at the end. And additionally, if they play the active move, we stop up the whole center, and there's nothing they can really do about it. For another line to look at here, if they play knight e4, we'll take on e6. So it might be logical for them to try to bolster the defense of d5 somehow. Like maybe they could move this rook to d8 with the intention of playing a move like bishop c8 perhaps. But I think their center's more or less falling apart. Two can play this game. Maybe we would play rook a d1 so that they can't play a move like bishop c8 so easily. The idea here is that if they play bishop c8 to guard d5, we'll win it anyway because we just have more force. If they take with the knight, we can throw this one in, and bishop d5 will guard the knight, so nothing bad can happen here. And if they take with the bishop, we'll remove the defender. This seems most natural to me. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a tactical foray. What happens if they play their thematic break now? Once white has established this formation with like f4 and e5 and a knight on d4, it's a tough nut to crack. Granted, we are looking at this position with no dark square bishops, so there might be some way that black could have created counterplay with the dark square bishops. But I find it quite unlikely because if you think about the early stage of the game, and I'll come back to this, I just want to point out something about the opening. So we traded the dark square bishops here, but imagine if we didn't do it. If we just played e5 and we got into a very similar position. I'm just going to set up the pieces the way it should be to do a comparison. In this position, in order to go ahead and have a position where white plays queen d2, we need to first play bishop e3, which adds to the tension on d4 and c5. Now, if black goes ahead and plays like a6, for example, and we play queen d2, and they play b5, no, not b5. First, let's say they take on d4, because this is what's going to get us into a line that's similar to what we were talking about. They're going to play bishop c5, and they have to trade everything on d4 anyway, including the dark square bishops. So that's part of why this structure and the strategy that we're looking at in this particular game are so useful. They can arise in various ways. Once the pawn structure is established, a lot of the time you get an endgame that looks a lot like what we had before, even if the move order is different, because strategically they have to kind of go down similar channels to create counterplay against you. Alright, so coming back here. Oh, sorry. I scrolled a little too far. So knight d4 happened, they played rook c8, and now a little show and tell, king f2 is what white did. And the idea here I think is pretty transparent. It's that they want to support the d4 outpost. You might be thinking, well, why aren't we using the rooks to support? Because it seems maybe less natural for some players to bring their king to the outpost square. Well, I think the king exerts a really powerful force in their locality. Like when they are right here, they control this entire box, and I think that's maybe more useful in the vicinity of the outpost square than the rook, who only controls half as many. But if you're looking at the entire board as well, the rooks have other work to do, and we'll see what the main plan is here. First, let's just see what happened with the pieces. Black played rook e8, which is kind of like a nothing move. Hello, Vedant, welcome. And white played rook f2, which probably makes sense. They played knight b7, also a questionable move. And we're going to fast forward a little bit here. Bishop f1 is guarding the c4 square. It's also up to another plan here. We'll see. Knight a5. b3 weakens the structure, but I don't really care. Vedant says the sound is so clear. That's funny, because earlier people were saying that like there's an echo and stuff, so I'm glad to get some positive feedback about my audio, so thank you. I was actually worried that this whole time it was just bad. I have to edit out the beginning of the stream when I was troubleshooting it. So anyway, after b3, you might think that white's queenside is getting a little pulverized or massaged or something, but it's really not a big deal to weaken c3 in this kind of position. We're going to put our king on d4 anyway. So they played h6, which is... Okay, I see their point in playing h6. They want to play g5 and create counterplay against white center, but white doesn't have to take the g-pawn. I remember I once played someone in this structure, or a very similar structure, where I actually did some tactics and like just destroyed them on the queen side, which was quite unusual. But one of the things that he said after the game was that after he played g5, that like he has to be better, and I thought that was really interesting that he had such a strong feeling about playing g5, and it made me want to look into it more and see like what did he see in this move that I didn't see. And I think it's that in a lot of classical games, this is how black creates counterplay, and I don't think they're better. I think some people, like maybe Kremnik, they say they're better a lot of the time, but what they really mean is they know what to do in that position. So it's an interesting idea to play g5, but they never really got it going in this game. Alright, bishop d3 happened. Knight c6. And now here is another good moment to pause and say, what should white do? And again, you should think in like a short sequence, something that's like a concept, not just a standalone move. Yeah, I'm glad it's working for you too, Shai. And yeah, we are at like a hefty number of subscribers now. Once I crossed 1,000, the rate at which people have been joining in and watching my videos has increased a lot. So I think it won't be that long before we're at like 2,000 subscribers, which would be really cool. I think getting to like 2,000 subscribers would probably put me in the upper like 20th percentile of chess streamers or something. Because I've noticed there are many chess channels, but they mostly have like under 1,000 subscribers. And there are a few that are really big, of course. But I mostly like the idea of growing our community. So if anybody is watching and they want to join in with study sessions and things like that, we have a Discord server for that, and you just have to request a link. And I will send you a link in the comments on YouTube. And you can join in and meet everybody and play and study, things like that. Good question, Vedant. How close are we to YouTube partner? So we're actually pretty close. Last time I looked, the watch hours was like 400 watch hours away, which sounds like a lot because, you know, watching 400 hours of anything sounds like a lot. But it's like 10% of the total goal. So we are pretty close. And I think it'll be cool if more people are watching and we just naturally cross that bridge. We actually made the requirement and I submitted my application, but the YouTube people were slow to get back to me, and I dropped below the threshold again, so I think it rescinded my application for that reason. But, you know, it's just a matter of time. I'm not in a rush. I'm just going to keep making content here, and hopefully keep making it better. I know I always have some kind of, like, silly technical issues because I'm not interested in technical things that much. I'm more interested in the chess. But hopefully I'll get better at that, too, over time. Alright, so what do you guys think? Any moves for white? Some small idea, a short sequence for how white can improve their position after knight c6. I should point out that I don't think black wants to play knight takes d4 necessarily. I think that they would rather play knight b4, but even knight b4 doesn't impress me that much. Trading the knight for the bishop on d3 does sound pretty enticing, though. I don't think it's amazing for black, but it is something. A little tiny way of making headway. Because, as you guys might have seen in my tribute video for FIDE Master Boris Privman, who was my friend, I showed one game between us where he had a bishop with black in this structure, and I had a knight. And because I didn't understand the position well enough, I misplayed it and lost. I think that the kind of counterplay that he got in that game would not be possible if it was bishop against bishop. So, if that's not a big hint for you, if you're watching the recording, you can just go right ahead and see what I'm going to say next. But if you think you can get it from here, you might want to pause again. The move should be knight takes c6, because this knight is black's only hope. It's their most active minor piece. They want to play knight b4 and take the bishop. Even if they do that, I think it's good for white. For example, let's say white plays... let's say white plays like rook g1, just some kind of, filler move here. If they play this move, and we hit with a3, I think that the move c takes d3 is generally strong. Maybe in this particular situation it's not that great, but it seems fine to me. The reason I like this a lot is that the knight on d4 is like a forever piece. It's just staying there and doing really great. It can't be shaken, can't be touched. c4 can't be used. c2 is under control. c1 is the only real entry point for black here. Welcome, Utermaster. And b3 is also nicely protected by this knight. So I don't really think black has a lot going on here in this structure. But it's really precise to play knight takes c6, because after any capture on c6, you play king d4. And now the king occupies the outpost square. And can't be shaken as well, just like the knight. Nobody can attack this king. Snug as a bug in a rug or something like that. So here, black started doing some pirouetting because they don't really have anything to do. And this is where I think it's the hardest moment. Like, maybe you did everything right, you studied your openings, and you know that in the structure you execute this plan. Yeah, Utermaster got it. Yeah, Bungcloud or Rice. But now what do we do? Like, we got our outpost square, like, so well established. What's the point? Why are we establishing such great control of the center and the queenside? Can we actually win just by putting our king on d4? Probably not. You need to do something else here. So, what should we do? It's noteworthy that black has no counterplay. They can try, but, like, basically nothing. Utermaster says a3. That's an interesting move. I guess you want to prevent b4. Right now, b4 is prevented because after b4, you can play bishop takes a6. And I don't think that allowing rook a8 is a problem. You just put your bishop back on d3. And the b pawn is also weak. Like, if they tried to ever bring both rooks to the a file, you could go, like, just let them have the a2 pawn and take the pawn on b4. Maybe play king c5. Rise. But yeah, attack the Kingside is more in line with what I'm thinking. So, what if you just go ahead and start attacking on the Kingside? What would that look like? Alright, so Utermaster is giving a list of moves for white since black doesn't have counterplay. So we're supposing black is just going to time pass here. Thanks for dropping in, Shy. Take care. And I look forward to seeing your face-off with Mount Fiant. So he's saying rook g2, rook g1. I'm guessing the other one. h3, g4, f5. I think this looks a little slow, but since black doesn't really have counterplay, it should be fine. I would worry a little bit about being uneconomical, just because maybe black can create a trap for you to step in if you're too slow. But, let's just start with g4. And the reason I'm starting with g4 and not a move like rook g2, like what you suggested, I'm just assuming you were, starting that way. Yeah, better to start with g4. Good. I think the issue is that black could... Alright, I'm actually doubting myself now. I was thinking you could throw h5. And taking more pawns off the board is actually going to benefit black here. I think if black could get rid of both the g-pawns and both of the h-pawns, their structure might be defensible even. They could try to build a fortress where they put their king on e7 and their bishop on e8, something like that. So h5 is one defending concept. And they'll play g6 as well. But they could also start with g6 with the idea of just preventing f5 entirely, at which point you can play g4. So maybe that's not quite working. I thought also g5. This is what made me doubt. Like, my first thought was h5. But what if we play g5 here? It kind of just like adds some chaos to the position. Maybe a different way of getting counterplay, like try to bring the rook to the g file as black. No, this shouldn't really be that impressive. Like maybe we take and play h4 with the idea that if they take, it's check. We get the rooks doubled on the g file, lickety split, everything's good. And if they play this, I think we can just go win the pawn. No, bishop e2 runs into rook c2. Maybe we win it like this in 2 moves. If they play f5, we take en passant. Maybe that's counterplay for black, though. Idea is rook f4 and rook takes g4. So maybe they'll play this. I want to take that en passant. I want it that way. Maybe they would play rook f8, and the idea here is that if you play f4, rook f4. No, this should be winning for white. But my counterplay idea was that if you take this, there's e5 check. But this is like a dumb tactic. They're not going to do that. They're going to play king e5. So this should be fine. Yeah, I think probably rook g2 is even okay, but I think h5 might make it trickier. e5 instead of rook f8, okay. Here. And give the d-pawn? Yeah, maybe, because bishop c6, right? But no, I don't think this works tactically, does it? Hold on. We take. We go here. They take this one. We take this one. They take this one, and we are... Hold on, what's the evaluation here? I think it's probably not good, because I was thinking we might get f7 in, but we don't. And if we play f7 here, they take. Yeah, okay, this is not working. Sorry, I thought I saw a tactic for a second. Looks like Wilma has a link for everyone to click on, so don't click on it. Okay, so e5 is a good idea. Is it good enough? Let me see. So I guess we have to just play this. No problem. They could throw d4 here, which probably doesn't appreciably like improve things. I think as black, I'd rather keep the pawns like this. We're threatening f7. I mean, they're just down a pawn. I don't think this is the right direction. It did make a mess, though. So if they're going for counterplay, maybe this is a good chance. Bon chance. But all this is by way of saying that g4 is the better move order, because this stops h5 and f5. It's just not happening. Ain't gonna happen. So after bishop c8, let's just see how the game went. They started rolling with h4. G6 was played to prevent f5 and h5. Rook h1 is just kind of pushing that agenda. And the general idea here for white is that they're going to just open lines now that the rooks are active. Now that white has full control of the center and the queenside, well, mostly the center, black cannot easily move their rooks from attacking on the queenside to defending on the kingside. So if white just opens lines for their rooks, they should be able to create a decisive entry point somewhere, either in the center or the queenside or the kingside. They can attack on multiple fronts. But let's say black just plays passively, which is what we're seeing here. Bishop d7, black's just waiting and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. You tell me. How should white make progress here? We have to use a theme that we saw earlier in a similar position. How's it gonna be? By the way, if I'm a little bit slow, I'm sorry about that. I think it's because I keep forgetting to make my latency lower so I can see your comments in real time. So if we just take on g6, like h takes g6, f takes g6, and then attempt to open more lines with like g5, they're going to just say no thank you and play h5. And then it's hard to say what is going on in this position. Probably it's at least a draw, but it's definitely headway for black because they locked the kingside by a miracle. Similarly, if we play f5, I think they can say nope by playing g takes f5. No, if they play g takes f5, there's g takes f5, and after e takes f5, there's king takes... No, there's no king takes d5, but still, they shouldn't weaken d5 long term like that. So probably after f5, they should play nothing at all. They should play bishop e8 and just allow a capture on g6 or e6. But probably white's okay after f5 in that case, because I think you could always play f6 and then take on g6. Yeah, probably white's better after f5 actually. I'm wondering, the move that was played I think is more transparent. So I'm wondering now about f5. No, after f5, g5, f6 is really weak. So we'll switch. We'll play f takes e6. And after like f takes e6, we'll play rook f2 and rook f1. So I don't think g5 is working out after f5. Let's take a look actually. There's also f6. And after f6, I think white can win in different ways. Because h6 is just so weak that I would want to just switch to the queen side and break on that side of the board. Like this. They have to block their rook in forever, right? Like this looks so bad. Like probably they have to go here. And now I'll switch. I might play like c3 and then a4 and just bring the rooks. Like this. And they can't use this rook, right? So they have to try to free the rook. This is probably the best way to try that. Maybe just throw a4. You can't take twice here because I have this. Alright, you said bishop c6. Let me see. Bishop c6 in this position. I'll just take, and then the lines are open. If you meant instead of king e8, bishop c6, I'm also just not impressed. Like, I'll still play a4. So if I go a4 here, and you take, and take, and take, I win the rook or something. Like, just something's got to give. Like, if you go here to protect the pawn, I'll just take, and then do this. And you know how that goes. And if you don't take in the first place, the b file is open. So I have what I want. Bishop c6 here. Yeah, not bishop b5. And I'm sorry about setting the latency so low. I should be able to see your comments in real time, but I'm not good at what I do. So rook b1 seems best to me. And this is pretty much it. Like, they're just not getting out. Like, I guess they can go here. I could just clamp here, probably, because if you play bishop b5, I win material, and you can't play rook b8. And if you play rook b7, that's probably, like, myth busted, because I can just take on a6 at some point. Not, like, now, because it's hanging, but I mean, like, something like this. You can't play rook b8 still. So you'd have to move the bishop, maybe here. And then you lose. Rook a7 is just so bad. Like, why would you want this position? Like, I'm gonna go here. Like, yeah, you can use your rook finally, but this is still, like, we're looking at the conversion step. This is like a winning position. If you trade rooks at some point, I could even use this idea. Like, just put the bishop right there and then, you know, see how you like it. I also have the c4 break still, so if I need more open lines, I can open more lines. Another idea is to play rook b8, and if you don't like it and you, like, try to avoid an exchange, I play rook h8. I mean, we can play this out, but I don't think this is productive. Like, I'll go. You're gonna get in Zugzwang eventually. Here, I don't think you could even get counterplay with d4 because I'm threatening rook c6. So do something about it, right? It looks very hard. We could play this out forever. I don't think it's going to work out. I mean, it's a long conversion, but I also don't know if I played the most precise way. I just know that this is good. It has to be good. But g5 is the main solution here. This is much simpler than f5. Idea being that if you... Well, first of all, if you don't take, I'm taking on g6 and then I'm taking on h6. Yeah. So after pawn takes g5, we take back on g5, and they can't really trade stuff like they traded. And after king f8, rook h8, king e7, they're trying to get that kind of defensive setup. And the rest of the game was not really, like, good conversion by Tarash against Teichmann. He played g6 here. What do you guys think is the best move for white? I think there's, like, a knockout blow, and we could probably wrap it up there instead of seeing how he, like, was a chump in the endgame. Welcome back, Vedant. Yeah, rook h7, but then what? Yttermaster, we need a line here. At least an idea. Getting a single move is generally not good. I think it's good to, like, say a move and then, like, what your idea is behind the move. Yeah, rook h7 and then... Okay, so you're saying rook h7 then g6, but you can't play twice in a row. And in this situation, since it's like a tactic, I think black will play the obvious defending move, which is king e8. Stepping out of the pin seems pretty natural. This is also not like a trivial tactic thing. Rook h7 is the right way to think, though, because we're pressuring every single black piece with rook h7, preparing g6, which looks strong, right? So rook h7, king e8, now what? Obviously not rook h8, that's just repeating the position. We don't want that. Maybe you can think about it this way. So after rook h7, you're attacking a weakness, right? f7 is the weakness. After king e8, they still can't resolve the weakness because we blockaded with e5 and g5. So how can you attack the weakness more? Right? We only have one other piece that can do it. It's the bishop. So we should try to bring the bishop to attack f7. But there's a problem with that, because if you play a move that brings the bishop to attack f7, you have to abandon the c-pawn. Yeah, I saw your comment, Master. You don't have to delete things, even if you think they're incorrect. It's good for everyone to see what others are thinking. So, yeah, all good. So after rook h7, king e8, you should play c3. Sorry, not g6. That's what they played in the game. Rook h7, and now c3. And this is a prophylactic move. We just don't want to allow rook takes c2 with counterplay. Yeah, and now we're playing bishop e2 to h5. So that's correct. Good. And this is just lights out. Nothing they can do about this. If they play king e7 at any point, we have g6. If they play king f8, I think we still have g6, and this is like Zugzwang. They have to take. And now they can't bring their king back to the queenside, so I'd say that the queenside pieces are frozen. If they move the rook away on the c file, they lose the bishop. If they move the bishop, they lose the rook. So they might play like this, but this is trading into like a much worse endgame. Like I think this is probably like a winning tactic even, because we're playing king d6 if they play rook c7. So we can give up the c-pawn and just take the bishop. Anyway, so that's just a little line there. So, but in the game they played g6, and if anything, Soltis commented that the relatively poor play by Tarash just shows kind of like how easy it is for white to win this kind of position. And I disagree on that note, because the level of defense is much higher even than when he wrote the book these days. But still, it does kind of show like white's doing pretty well. And after rook c3, they eventually made a mistake and resigned. They resigned here because of rook a8, just winning the pawn. Okay, I got you, Eater Master. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up here because this one game took a really long time, but I think it's a very instructive game about how we play this kind of pawn structure in the first place. How we can go straight into the end game and use the outpost concepts that we've already talked about in some other lessons here in my channel to great effect. So I think I'll wrap it up here, of course. And thank you guys for coming, and I hope that everything was good with the audio and stuff. I'm going to clean up the early part of the video later on. And as usual, anyone who's new, feel free to request a link to our Discord so you can join and study with everyone. Alright, I guess that'll be it for now. So thanks everyone. Take care.